The morning sky over the Pacific was deceptively calm when Captain Kira, Nightshade, Volkov received the transmission that would change everything. At 5:47 hours, her F-22 Raptor sliced through the dawn like a blade through silk, its stealth coating absorbing the first rays of sunlight. The radio crackled with routine chatter from Yokota Air Base, but something felt wrong. The kind of wrong that made 20-year veterans check their instruments twice. Nightshade, this is Tower. We're showing an anomaly on your sector. Confirm your position. The voice belonged to Major Rodriguez, a man who'd never called her by her call sign without a hint of skepticism. To him, she was still the pilot who'd washed out of the Thunderbirds program 3 years ago. To him, she was still the woman who'd gotten her squadron leader killed in Afghanistan. Kira's gloved fingers danced across the console, her eyes scanning the heads-up display. Tower, Nightshade is at Angels 20, heading 090, all systems nominal. But even as she spoke, her radar was painting a picture that made her blood run cold. 12 contacts approaching fast from the northwest. No IFF signals. No radio chatter. Just silence. The first rule of aerial combat is that silence kills. The second rule is that when 12 enemy fighters surround you, you're already dead. But as Kira watched the contacts close in, something impossible happened. They stopped. Not slowed, not turned, stopped. Frozen in space like insects in amber, their heat signatures blazing on her thermal display but their movement vectors reading 0. Tower, I'm showing 12 hostiles at my position. There. They're not moving. Her voice remained steady, professional, but her heart hammered against her ribs. 20 years of flying had taught her to trust her instruments, but this defied every law of physics she knew. Nightshade, say again. Did you say 12 hostiles? Affirmative, Tower. 12 contacts bearing various. They appeared to be closing on my position but have now ceased all movement, requesting immediate backup. The radio fell silent. In that silence, Kira felt the weight of every doubt, every whispered conversation behind her back, every time she'd been passed over for promotion because she was too aggressive or didn't fit the team dynamic. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman they deemed unfit for elite squadrons was now the only thing standing between 12 enemy fighters and American airspace. Then her console lit up with a code she'd never seen before, Code Bravo. The red letters pulsed like a heartbeat, and suddenly the frozen fighters around her began to move again. This time, they weren't approaching. They were forming up in perfect formation, as if waiting for her command. The communications system crackled to life with a voice that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Welcome to the program, Nightshade. You've been chosen. Major Rodriguez's voice cut through the static, trembling with something between awe and terror. Nightshade, you are now classified beyond top secret. Return to base immediately. And Captain, his voice softened. Whatever you think you know about your career, about that night in Afghanistan, forget it. Everything is about to change. As Kira banked her Raptor toward home, the 12 fighters followed in perfect synchronization. She'd spent 3 years believing she was a failure, a pilot whose mistake had cost lives. Now, staring at the impossible formation surrounding her, she began to understand that her entire career had been orchestrated. Every failure, every setback, every moment of doubt, it had all been preparation for this moment. The woman they called Nightshade was about to discover that some shadows are deeper than others, and some nights last longer than a lifetime. The real question wasn't what these fighters wanted with her. The real question was what she'd unknowingly volunteered for 20 years ago when she'd first taken the stick of a fighter jet and felt the sky call her name. Behind her, the sunrise painted the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson, but ahead lay only darkness. And in that darkness, something was waiting. Back at Yokota Air Base, a room full of generals watched their screens in stunned silence. The woman they'd written off as a liability had just triggered the most classified protocol in military history. Code Bravo hadn't been activated in 30 years. not since the last pilot capable of interfacing with Project Shadowhawk had died in a training accident. They'd searched the world for his replacement, testing thousands of pilots, and found no one. Until now. General Patricia Hayes, commander of Pacific Air Forces, leaned forward in her chair. "Gentlemen, we have our pilot, and God help us all because she's about to learn what we've been hiding in the shadows for 3 decades." The screen displayed Kira's biographical data, but Hayes knew the real story. The night in Afghanistan when Captain Volkov had lost her squadron leader wasn't a mistake. It was a test. A test to see if she possessed the rare neurological markers that would allow her to interface with technology beyond human understanding. The guilt that had eaten at her for 3 years wasn't just survivor's remorse. It was her brain adapting to capabilities she didn't know she possessed. "Sir," a young lieutenant whispered, "the Shadowhawk fighters are responding to her neural patterns. Should we proceed with Phase 2? Hayes nodded grimly. "Activate the deep memories. It's time Captain Volkov learned who she really is." Kira felt the change before she saw it. The heads-up display in her Raptor began showing information that shouldn't exist: tactical data from her escorts, their fuel levels, their weapons status, even their pilots' heart rates. More disturbing still, she could sense their thoughts, their emotions, their intentions. It was as if her mind had suddenly expanded to encompass 12 other consciousness. "What the hell is happening to me?" she whispered, but deep down she knew. The memories were returning, fragments of a past she'd thought were dreams. The facility in Nevada, the experiments, the day they'd told her she was special, that her brain could interface with aircraft in ways that defied conventional understanding. The day they'd made her forget. "Nightshade, this is Control, we need to talk." The voice was different now, older, more authoritative. "You're experiencing neural reintegration. The memories they suppressed are returning. Don't fight it. Let them come." As her Raptor descended toward the airfield, Kira saw the truth laid out before her like a map. The 12 fighters weren't enemy aircraft. They were American experimental craft, piloted by artificial intelligences that could only be controlled by someone with her unique neural architecture. The shadowy program she'd been unknowingly recruited for as a teenager. The reason her career had been so carefully managed, so precisely orchestrated. She wasn't just a pilot. She was a key, and the lock she'd been designed to open was about to reveal secrets that would reshape the world. The landing was perfect, as it always was, but as Kira taxied to a stop, she saw the reception committee waiting for her. 12 figures in unmarked uniforms, each one connected to the aircraft that had escorted her home. They stood at attention, their faces hidden behind visors, but she could sense their anticipation, their relief, their fear. "Welcome home, Commander Volkov," said the lead figure as she climbed from her cockpit. "We've been waiting 20 years for you to remember." The title hit her like a physical blow. Commander, not captain. She'd been promoted in secret, her real rank hidden even from herself. The woman who'd been passed over for the Thunderbirds was actually the highest-ranking pilot in the most classified program in military history. "I remember," she said, and the words felt like both a confession and a declaration of war. "I remember everything." The lead figure removed his visor, revealing a face she recognized from dreams that weren't dreams. Colonel Marcus Webb, the man who'd recruited her from the academy. The man who'd overseen her conditioning, her training, her careful preparation for this moment. "Then you know what comes next," he said. "The program is active, the threat is real, and you're the only one who can stop it." Above them, the sky had turned the color of burnished steel, and in that metallic heavens, more shapes were beginning to appear. Not American craft this time. Something else. Something that had been waiting in the shadows for 3 decades, biding its time, preparing for the moment when Shadowhawk would finally emerge from the darkness. The woman they called Nightshade looked up at the approaching formations and felt a smile touch her lips. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't running from her past. She was running toward her destiny. The real war was about to begin. Colonel Webb led her through corridors that existed on no blueprint, past laboratories that officially didn't exist, to a briefing room where the walls themselves seemed to pulse with classified information. The 12 pilots who'd escorted her home were already seated, their visors removed, their faces bearing the same neural interface scars that she was now remembering on her own skull. "Ladies and gentlemen," Webb announced, "meet your flight leader." The silence that followed was heavy with 3 decades of preparation. These weren't ordinary pilots. They were the best of the best, selected and modified for this specific mission. But none of them possessed her unique ability to interface with the Shadowhawk network directly. They were extensions of her will, her consciousness expanded across 12 aircraft simultaneously. "The situation is as follows," Webb continued, activating a holographic display. 3 hours ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected an anomaly approaching Earth. It's not meteoric, it's not natural, and it's definitely not ours. More importantly, it's broadcasting on the same frequency as our Shadowhawk network." The implications hit Kira like a sledgehammer. The technology they'd used to enhance her abilities, to create the interface between human consciousness and artificial intelligence, it wasn't entirely human in origin. The program had been reverse-engineered from something else, something that was now coming home. "How long do we have?" she asked. 12 hours until it reaches the atmosphere. 6 hours until it's within our engagement envelope." Webb's expression was grim. The conventional military is completely unaware of this threat. As far as they're concerned, you're still on a routine patrol. The decision has been made at the highest levels. Shadowhawk Squadron is our only response. One of the pilots, a woman with intricate neurals scarring along her temples, spoke up. "Commander, what are our engagement parameters?" The question hung in the air like smoke. These weren't the rules of engagement she'd learned in flight school. This was warfare on a level that transcended nationality, ideology, or even species. The enemy wasn't human, and the battle would be fought in dimensions that conventional physics couldn't adequately describe. "We intercept, we assess, we engage if necessary," Kira replied, her voice carrying an authority she didn't know she possessed. "But remember, we're not just pilots anymore. We're the interface between human will and capabilities beyond human understanding. Whatever's coming, it's been waiting for us to be ready." The briefing continued for another hour, but Kira found herself only half listening. Her mind was reaching out, testing the connections to her squadron, feeling the pulse of their artificial intelligences as they prepared for combat. The sensation was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She was no longer just herself, but a distributed consciousness spanning multiple aircraft and artificial minds. As they prepared to launch, Webb pulled her aside. "There's something else you need to know. The night in Afghanistan when you lost Lieutenant Morrison, that wasn't an accident. It was a test. We needed to know if you could make the hard choices, if you could sacrifice one to save many. We needed to know if you were strong enough for what was coming." The words should have angered her, but instead, Kira felt a strange sense of relief. Morrison's death had haunted her for 3 years, but now she understood it as part of a larger pattern. Every setback, every failure, every moment of doubt had been preparation for this day. "Was he in on it?" she asked. Webb shook his head. "He volunteered when he learned the truth, said he'd rather die in service to something greater than live in ignorance. His sacrifice wasn't in vain. It unlocked the final level of your abilities." The hangar doors opened, revealing 12 aircraft that looked nothing like conventional fighters. They were sleek, almost organic in their design, with surfaces that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. The Shadowhawk fighters were beautiful and terrible, technology that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. "Remember," Webb called as she walked toward her aircraft, "you're not just flying anymore. You're conducting a symphony of consciousness. Trust the network, trust your squadron, and trust yourself." As Kira climbed into her cockpit, She felt the neural interface activate. The world exploded into a cascade of information, not just from her own aircraft, but from all 12. She was everywhere at once, seeing through multiple sets of eyes, thinking with multiple minds, feeling the pulse of artificial intelligences that had been waiting decades for her return. The launch was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. The 12 aircraft rose as one, their movements perfectly synchronized, their artificial minds linked through her consciousness. She was the conductor of a deadly orchestra, and the music they were about to play would determine the fate of humanity. As they climbed toward the upper atmosphere, Kira felt the approaching presence like a weight in her mind. Whatever was coming, it was vast, ancient, and utterly alien. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't afraid. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she'd been born to do. The woman they'd called a failure was about to save the world. The ascent through the atmosphere was surreal. At 50,000 feet, the sky turned from blue to black, and the curvature of the earth became visible below them. The Shadowhawk fighters moved with impossible grace, their exotic propulsion systems allowing them to operate at altitudes where conventional aircraft would fail. Contact bearing 090, range 100,000 kilometers and closing, reported Lieutenant Sarah Chen, her voice transmitted directly through the neural link. But even as she spoke, Kira was seeing through her sensors, feeling the radar return that defied explanation. The object was massive, easily the size of a small city, and it was moving with deliberate purpose toward Earth. Its surface was covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched, and it was broadcasting a signal that made their neural interfaces tingle with recognition. "It's trying to communicate," whispered Captain James Rodriguez, his mental voice tinged with awe. "The signal, it's the same frequency as our neural networks." Kira felt the truth of it. The approaching vessel wasn't just alien. It was the source of the technology that had created their squadron. 30 years ago, something had crashed in the Nevada desert, and the wreckage had been reverse-engineered to create the Shadowhawk program. Now the owners were coming to collect their property. "All units maintain formation. We're going to attempt first contact." Her voice carried across the network, calm and professional, but inside, her mind was racing. The protocols for this situation filled volumes of classified manuals, but none of them adequately prepared her for the reality of facing something that existed beyond human understanding. The vessel began to slow as they approached, its surface rippling like water. Sections of its hull became transparent, revealing an interior that defied conventional geometry. Corridors that bent back on themselves, chambers that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and at the center, something that might have been a control room or might have been a living organism. "Commander, I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout the vessel," reported Lieutenant David Park. "Whatever it's planning, it's about to happen." The communication came not through radio waves or any conventional medium, but directly into their minds. It was a voice without sound, a language without words, a consciousness that existed on a scale that made their enhanced abilities seem primitive by comparison. "Children of the third iteration," the voice said, and somehow they all understood perfectly. "You have grown beyond our expectations. The time of testing is complete. Now comes the choosing." The space around them began to change. The black of space became a canvas painted with colors that had no names, and the stars themselves rearranged into patterns that told stories older than human civilization. The Shadowhawk fighters found themselves suspended in a bubble of altered reality, their conventional instruments useless, their enhanced perceptions the only thing keeping them sane. "What do you want?" Kira asked, her mental voice projected toward the massive vessel. "To understand what you have become," came the reply. "Your species was marked for observation 300 of your years ago. The crash you call Roswell was not accidental, it was a test. The technology you recovered, the enhancements you developed, the the consciousness you have achieved, all of it was guided, shaped, prepared for this moment. The implications were staggering. Humanity's greatest technological achievements, their most classified programs, their evolution toward a more connected consciousness, all of it had been orchestrated by beings whose motivations they couldn't begin to comprehend. And now, Kira asked, now you choose. Join us in the greater cosmos, abandon your planet to grow beyond its limitations, or remain bound to your world and face the consequences of that choice. The silence that followed was deafening. 12 pilots, enhanced beyond human norms, faced with a decision that would determine the fate of their species. But as Kira looked around at her squadron, she saw something the aliens might not have expected. She saw humans who had been given incredible power and used it to protect others. What happens to Earth if we refuse? She asked. Earth continues as it has. Your species develops naturally without our guidance. But the universe is vast and dark, and there are things in the void that consume planets like yours. Without our protection, your world will not survive the coming storm. The weight of the decision settled on them like a physical force. Accept the aliens' offer and potentially save humanity, but at the cost of everything that made them human. Refuse and condemn their species to face cosmic threats alone. But as Kira felt the pulse of her squadron's consciousness, she realized they'd already made their choice. These pilots hadn't been enhanced to abandon their humanity. They'd been enhanced to transcend it while remaining fundamentally human. The technology might have been alien, but the will to protect, to serve, to sacrifice for others, that was purely human. We choose Earth, she said, her voice carrying the conviction of 12 minds speaking as one. We choose to remain human, and we choose to protect our world whatever the cost. The alien consciousness seemed to consider this, and for a moment, Kira felt its vast intelligence focusing on their small squadron. Then, something that might have been approval or might have been disappointment colored its response. So be it, the protection is withdrawn, the beacon is silenced, you face the dark alone. The space around them began to return to normal, the impossible colors fading back to the familiar black of space. But before the vessel departed, it transmitted one final message, not to their minds, but to their aircraft. The Shadowhawk fighters began to change, their systems upgrading in real time, their capabilities expanding beyond anything they'd imagined possible. A gift, the voice said, for those who choose duty over transcendence. You will need every advantage for what is coming. As the massive vessel began to accelerate away from Earth, Kira felt something else, a presence at the edge of her awareness, something vast and hungry approaching from the depths of space. The aliens' warning hadn't been empty rhetoric. Something was coming, and humanity's brief moment of contact with their erstwhile guardians had painted a target on their world. All units return to base, she ordered. We have work to do. But as they descended toward Earth, Kira knew their real mission was just beginning. The woman who'd been written off as a failure was now humanity's first line of defense against threats that existed beyond human comprehension. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, something was taking notice of the small blue planet that had just declared its independence from cosmic protection. The return to base was subdued, each pilot processing the magnitude of what they'd experienced. The Shadowhawk fighters landed with enhanced capabilities they didn't fully understand. Their artificial intelligence systems evolved beyond their original programming. But more importantly, the neural network that connected them had been fundamentally altered by their contact with the alien consciousness. Colonel Webb was waiting in the debriefing room, his face grave. I monitored the entire encounter through your neural feeds, he said. The implications are staggering. We're no longer just dealing with classified technology, we're dealing with the future of human civilization. What's our operational status? Kira asked, her mind still reeling from the contact. Officially, nothing has changed. The conventional military remains unaware of the threat, but unofficially, we're now Earth's primary defense against whatever's coming. The president has been briefed, and he's authorized full activation of all dormant Shadowhawk assets. The scale of it was overwhelming. She thought their squadron was unique, but Webb's words suggested there were others, sleeping installations waiting to be awakened. The program she'd been unknowingly part of was larger than she'd imagined. How many? She asked. 57 operational squadrons worldwide. 736 pilots like yourself, enhanced and waiting for activation. The technology we recovered 30 years ago was far more extensive than we initially realized. The numbers should have been reassuring, but Kira felt only a growing sense of dread. If they needed that many enhanced pilots, whatever was coming was beyond anything they'd faced before. Over the next several days, the squadron trained with their upgraded systems, learning to interface with capabilities that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. The artificial intelligences that controlled their aircraft had evolved, becoming more sophisticated, more intuitive, more eerily human in their responses. But it was during a routine training exercise that they first detected the approaching threat. Lieutenant Park's sensors picked up an anomaly at the edge of the solar system, something vast and dark that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. It was moving slowly but deliberately toward Earth, its estimated arrival time calculated in months rather than years. "It's not a ship," Park reported during the emergency briefing. "It's something else, something that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Our enhanced sensors can barely comprehend its structure." The analysis took weeks, but the conclusion was inescapable. The approaching entity was a cosmic predator, something that consumed entire civilizations, harvesting their knowledge and consciousness before moving on to the next target. The aliens who had created the Shadowhawk program had been protecting Earth from threats like this for centuries. Now they were on their own. "We need to prepare for a different kind of war," Kira told her squadron. "Not nation against nation, but species against extinction. Everything we've trained for, everything we've sacrificed, it's all been preparation for this." The training intensified, but it was more than just combat preparation. The neural network that connected the pilots began to evolve, becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. They were becoming a collective consciousness, their individual minds linked but not subsumed, their humanity preserved while their capabilities expanded. But even as they prepared for the coming battle, Kira couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The aliens' departure hadn't been random. It had been timed precisely to coincide with the approaching threat. Had they known this entity was coming? Had they been preparing humanity for this specific battle? The answer came from an unexpected source. During a deep neural interface session, Lieutenant Chen reported contact with something else, not the approaching predator, but a presence that seemed to exist within the enhanced technology itself. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "It's like an echo," Chen reported. "A fragment of consciousness left behind when the aliens departed. It's trying to communicate something." The discovery changed everything. The aliens hadn't simply abandoned Earth. They'd left behind a guide, a fragment of their vast intelligence embedded in the technology they'd created. Working together, the squadron began to decode the message, piecing together warnings and instructions left by beings who had faced this threat before. The entity approaching Earth wasn't just a predator, it was a test, a cosmic trial that species throughout the galaxy were required to face. Most failed, their civilizations consumed and forgotten. But those who succeeded, who proved they could work together to face extinction, were granted membership in a larger community of worlds. "We're not just fighting for Earth," Kira realized. "We're fighting for humanity's right to exist among the stars." The knowledge was both terrifying and inspiring. The battle they were preparing for wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that humanity deserved a place in the cosmic order. The aliens who had guided their development hadn't abandoned them. They'd graduated them to face their final exam. As the weeks passed and the approaching entity drew closer, the squadron's training evolved into something approaching art. They moved as one consciousness across multiple aircraft, their enhanced abilities allowing them to operate in ways that defied conventional understanding. They were no longer just pilots. They were something new, something that had never existed before. But even as their capabilities grew, Kira never forgot the lesson of her career. The woman who'd been written off as a failure understood that true strength came not from power, but from the willingness to sacrifice for others. The technology might be alien, but the choice to protect, to serve, to stand against the darkness, that was purely human. The entity's approach accelerated as it entered the outer solar system, its massive form beginning to affect the orbits of the outer planets. The conventional military finally began to notice the anomalies, but their instruments couldn't detect the true nature of the threat. Only the Shadowhawk squadron and their enhanced perceptions could see what was coming. "It's time," Webb announced during their final briefing. "The entity will reach Earth's orbit in 72 hours. All Shadowhawk assets are being activated worldwide. You'll be leading the primary engagement force." The weight of command settled on Kira's shoulders, but she felt ready. 20 years of preparation, 3 years of doubt, and weeks of intensive training had led to this moment. The woman they'd called Nightshade was about to become humanity's sword against the darkness. As the squadron prepared for launch, she took one last look at Earth through the hangar's observation windows. The blue marble that had given birth to their species looked so fragile against the vastness of space, but she knew its appearance was deceptive. Humanity had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and countless other threats. Now they faced their greatest challenge, but they wouldn't face it alone. The enhanced pilots of Shadowhawk Squadron were humanity's answer to the cosmic darkness. They were the bridge between what humans had been and what they might become. And in the coming battle, they would prove that the species that had once crawled from the oceans of a small planet could stand against forces that consumed worlds. The launch was different this time. All 57 squadrons activated simultaneously, their combined consciousness creating a network that spanned the globe. 736 pilots, their minds linked through technology that transcended human understanding, prepared to face an enemy that existed beyond the boundaries of normal space. Kira felt the weight of their collective will, the determination of every pilot who had chosen to stand between humanity and extinction. They were no longer individuals. They were facets of a greater consciousness, each bringing their unique perspective to the whole while maintaining their essential humanity. The entity's presence was overwhelming as they approached. It existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its vast intelligence focused on the small blue planet that had dared to reject the protection of its former guardians. But as the Shadowhawk network came online, Kira felt something else: recognition. The entity had faced networks like theirs before, other species who had combined their consciousness to face the cosmic trial. Most had failed, their unity crumbling under the pressure of the entity's overwhelming presence. But some had succeeded, proving their worthiness to join the greater community of worlds. "This is it," Kira transmitted to the global network. "Everything we've trained for, everything we've sacrificed, it comes down to this moment. Remember who we are, remember what we're fighting for, and remember that we face this together." The battle was about to begin, but Kira knew it wouldn't be won through firepower or technological superiority. It would be won through the one thing that made humanity unique: their willingness to stand together against impossible odds, to sacrifice for strangers, to choose hope over despair. The woman who had once been written off as a failure was about to lead humanity's greatest victory. The night that had haunted her for 3 years was about to become the dawn of a new age for her species. The entity's attack came not through conventional weapons, but through an assault on consciousness itself. It reached into the minds of the Shadowhawk pilots, seeking to fragment their unity, to turn their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The sensation was like having molten metal poured directly into their brains, a pain that existed on levels beyond physical suffering. "Hold the line," Kira screamed across the network, her voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "Don't let it separate us." But the entity was relentless, its vast intelligence probing for weaknesses in their collective consciousness. It found them, buried traumas, hidden fears, moments of doubt that it amplified and weaponized. Across the network, pilots began to falter, their neural connections wavering under the assault. Lieutenant Park was the first to break, his consciousness fragmenting as the entity forced him to relive the moment his family had died in a car accident. His Shadowhawk fighter began to spin out of control, its artificial intelligence struggling to compensate for its pilot's mental collapse. "I've got him," transmitted Captain Rodriguez, his aircraft moving to intercept Parks before it could crash into the entity's hull. But the effort left him vulnerable, and the entity struck at his mind, forcing him to confront every life he'd taken in combat, every decision that had led to another's death. The network was beginning to collapse, the collective consciousness fragmenting under the entity's relentless assault. But as Kira felt her pilots falling one by one, she realized something crucial. The entity wasn't trying to destroy them. It was testing them, probing their resolve, forcing them to confront the darkest aspects of their humanity. "It's not an attack," she transmitted to the surviving pilots. "It's a trial. It's testing whether we can maintain our unity in the face of our own darkness. Don't fight the memories, accept them, integrate them, let them make us stronger." The revelation changed everything. Instead of resisting the entity's mental assault, the pilots began to embrace it, using their shared consciousness to support each other through their darkest moments. When Lieutenant Chen was forced to relive the night she'd lost her entire squad in Syria, the rest of the network surrounded her with their strength, their acceptance, their understanding. The entity's presence in their minds began to shift, its hostility transforming into something like curiosity. For the first time in eons, it had encountered a species that didn't break under the weight of their own darkness, but instead used it as a foundation for growth. "You are different," the entity communicated, its voice no longer the overwhelming force it had been. "Others have faced this trial with unity, but none have maintained that unity while confronting their individual darkness. You integrate shadow and light, failure and success, fear and courage. This is unexpected." The test continued for hours, each pilot forced to confront their deepest fears and failures while maintaining their connection to the network. But gradually, something beautiful began to emerge. The collective consciousness that had been their strength became something more, a genuine understanding of what it meant to be human, darkness and light intertwined. Kira found herself reliving that night in Afghanistan, but this time with the support of 700 other minds. The guilt that had haunted her for 3 years began to transform into something else, not absolution, but acceptance. She had made a choice, and that choice had consequences, but it had also led her to this moment where she could protect not just her squadron, but her entire species. "We are human," she transmitted to the entity, her voice carrying the conviction of the entire network. "We are flawed, we are imperfect, we fail and we suffer and we die. But we also hope, we love, we sacrifice for others, and we never stop trying to become better than we are. That is our strength, not our perfection, but our willingness to grow despite our imperfections." The entity's response was something that might have been laughter or might have been approval. "You have passed the trial," it communicated. "Your species has earned the right to continue to grow, to take its place among the stars. But the path will not be easy. There are others who will challenge you, tests that will make this one seem simple. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" The question hung in the space between worlds, and Kira felt the weight of her species' future pressing down on her. But as she looked around at her network, At the pilots who had faced their darkness and emerged stronger, she knew the answer. "We are ready," she said. "We choose to face whatever comes together." The entity began to withdraw, its vast presence fading from their minds. But before it departed entirely, it left behind something precious: knowledge. The locations of other species who had passed the trial, the coordinates of worlds where humanity might find allies, the understanding that they were no longer alone in the universe. As the Shadowhawk network began to return to Earth, Kira felt the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. They hadn't just saved their world, they'd earned their species' right to join the cosmic community. The woman who had been written off as a failure had led humanity's graduation ceremony. But even as they descended toward their home planet, she knew their real work was just beginning. The trial had ended, but the journey into the cosmos had just begun. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, other challenges were waiting for the species that had learned to embrace both light and shadow. The debriefing lasted for days, as military leaders across the globe struggled to comprehend what had happened. The existence of the Shadowhawk program was no longer secret. It couldn't be, not when 700 pilots had simultaneously experienced contact with cosmic forces beyond human understanding. "The world has changed," President Martinez announced during an emergency session of the United Nations. "We are no longer alone in the universe, and we are no longer protected by forces beyond our understanding. From this day forward, humanity must take responsibility for its own defense and its own future among the stars." The revelation sparked global upheaval. Religious leaders debated the theological implications of cosmic trials and alien guardians. Scientists scrambled to understand technology that operated on principles beyond conventional physics. Politicians argued about the implications of a post-terrestrial humanity. But for Kira and her squadron, the real work was just beginning. The knowledge the entity had left behind included star charts, communication protocols, and warnings about threats that existed in the depths of space. Humanity had graduated from its cosmic childhood, but the adult universe was full of dangers they couldn't yet imagine. "We need to expand the program," Webb announced during a classified briefing. "The trial proved that our consciousness network is effective, but we're going to need more pilots, more aircraft, and more infrastructure if we're going to defend Earth against the threats that are coming." The expansion was unprecedented. Within months, Shadowhawk training facilities opened on every continent, their existence no longer hidden from the public. The selection process was rigorous. Potential pilots needed not just exceptional flying skills, but the rare neurological markers that would allow them to interface with the enhanced technology. Kira found herself at the center of it all, her experience with the cosmic trial making her the de facto leader of humanity's space defense force. The woman who had once been mocked as Nightshade was now addressed as Admiral Volkov, commander of the Terran Defense Network. But command brought new challenges. The pilots who joined the program came from different cultures, different military traditions, different ways of understanding the world. Creating a unified consciousness network from such diversity required skills that went beyond tactical leadership. "The key is not to eliminate our differences," she explained to a group of new recruits, "but to weave them into something stronger. The entity tested us precisely because our humanity, with all its contradictions and complexities, was our greatest strength." The first real test of the expanded network came 18 months after the trial. Long-range sensors detected an approaching fleet of vessels, their origin unknown but their intentions clearly hostile. Unlike the cosmic entity, these were conventional threats, albeit ones operating with technology far beyond human capabilities. "Multiple contacts, bearing 047 Mark 18, reported Captain Sarah Kim, one of the Korean pilots who had joined the program. "Configuration suggests a scouting force, possibly probing our defenses." The response was swift and coordinated. 300 Shadowhawk fighters launched simultaneously from bases around the world, their pilots' minds linking into a consciousness network that spanned the globe. But as they approached the alien fleet, Kira realized this wasn't just about defense. It was about first contact with a species that might become either ally or enemy. All units maintain defensive formation, but do not engage unless fired upon, she commanded. We need to determine their intentions before we act. The alien vessels were sleek and predatory, their hulls covered in what appeared to be living metal that rippled and flowed like liquid. They moved with a grace that suggested organic intelligence, but their formation patterns were clearly military in nature. The first communication came as a mixture of mathematics and harmonics, a language that transcended spoken words. The Shadowhawk network's artificial intelligences worked to decode it, but the message was clear enough, a demand for surrender, backed by the threat of planetary bombardment. "They're called the Hegemony," reported Lieutenant Commander Chen, her enhanced consciousness interfacing directly with the alien communication systems. "They're a coalition of species that conquered their way across this sector of the galaxy. They're offering us a choice: submit to their rule or face annihilation." The response was unanimous across the network. Humanity had just earned its independence from cosmic protection. They weren't about to trade it for alien subjugation. But the enemy fleet was massive, their technology clearly superior to anything Earth could field. "We can't win through conventional tactics," Kira realized. "But we don't need to. We need to show them that conquering Earth would cost more than it's worth." The battle that followed was unlike anything in human history. The Shadowhawk fighters used their consciousness network to coordinate attacks that seemed to defy physics, their movements synchronized across hundreds of aircraft. They struck at the alien fleet like a school of fish attacking a shark, individually vulnerable, but collectively unstoppable. But the real victory came when the network began to adapt to the alien technology in real time. The artificial intelligences that controlled the Shadowhawk fighters learned from every encounter, their programming evolving to counter the aliens' advantages. Within hours, they were matching the enemy's capabilities, and within days, they were exceeding them. "This is impossible," transmitted one of the alien commanders, his message intercepted and decoded by the network. "No species develops this rapidly. What are they?" The answer came from an unexpected source. The cosmic entity that had tested humanity returned, not as a trial but as a witness. Its vast consciousness touched the edges of the battle, and its message was broadcast to both sides. "They are the Awakened," it announced. "The first species in this sector to pass the trial not through unity alone, but through the integration of darkness and light. They have earned protection under the Cosmic Accord." The alien fleet withdrew, but not before their commander transmitted a final message. "This is not over. The Hegemony does not forget, and we do not forgive. You have made an enemy today that will haunt you across the stars." As the immediate threat receded, Kira felt the weight of what they'd accomplished. Humanity had won its first interstellar war, but in doing so, they'd also announced their presence to a galaxy full of potential enemies. The woman who had once been criticized for being too aggressive now found herself leading a species that would need to be aggressive to survive. The aftermath of the battle brought new challenges. The knowledge that Earth was defended by a consciousness network capable of rapid adaptation spread through the galaxy, attracting attention from species that saw humanity as either a threat to be eliminated or a potential ally to be courted. "We're receiving communication requests from 17 different species," reported Colonel Webb during a security briefing. "Some are offering trade agreements, others are proposing military alliances, and a few are barely concealed threats." The decision of how to respond fell to Kira and her expanded command staff. The Shadowhawk network had evolved beyond a simple defense force. It was now humanity's primary interface with the cosmic community. Every choice they made would determine their species' future among the stars. We proceed carefully, she decided. We make no commitments we can't keep, but we also don't isolate ourselves. The galaxy is too dangerous for Earth to stand alone. The first diplomatic contact was with a species called the Architects, beings who had passed their own cosmic trial centuries earlier. They offered to share technology and knowledge in exchange for access to humanity's unique consciousness network capabilities. Your species has achieved something remarkable, their ambassador communicated during a meeting in deep space. Most who pass the trial do so through perfect unity, subsuming individual consciousness into collective will. You have maintained individuality while achieving collective action. This is unprecedented. The exchange of knowledge was transformative. The architects shared defensive technologies that could protect Earth from threats beyond the hegemony, while humanity offered insights into consciousness integration that revolutionized their understanding of collective intelligence. But not all contacts were friendly. The Devourers, a species that had failed their cosmic trial and been reduced to consuming other civilizations for survival, saw humanity's success as an insult to their own failure. Their attacks came without warning, their ships appearing from dimensional rifts to strike at Earth's orbital defenses. They're not trying to conquer us, Kira realized during one such attack. They're trying to prove that we don't deserve what we've achieved. They want to drag us down to their level. The war against the Devourers was brutal and endless, a conflict that stretched across star systems and dimensions. But it also forged humanity's consciousness network into something stronger, more flexible, more capable of adapting to threats that existed beyond normal space-time. Years passed, and the woman who had once been called Nightshade found herself transformed into something she'd never imagined. Admiral Volkov was no longer just a military commander. She was humanity's voice in the cosmic community, the architect of her species' future among the stars. The neural interface that connected her to the global consciousness network had evolved as well, allowing her to perceive reality on scales that would have been incomprehensible to her younger self. She could sense the movement of fleets across the galaxy, feel the pulse of consciousness networks on distant worlds, and touch the vast intelligence that governed the cosmic community. But despite her expanded capabilities, she never forgot the lesson that had defined her career. The night in Afghanistan when she'd lost Lieutenant Morrison had taught her that command meant being willing to sacrifice for others. The cosmic trial had taught her that humanity's strength came from embracing both light and shadow, and the wars that followed had taught her that the price of freedom was eternal vigilance. "We've come a long way from that morning over the Pacific," she said to Colonel Webb during a quiet moment between crises. "Sometimes I wonder if the woman who climbed into that F-22 would recognize what we've become." "She'd be proud," Webb replied. "You've led humanity further than any explorer in history. You've taken us from a single planet to a place among the stars." The compliment should have been satisfying, but Kira felt only the weight of responsibility. The cosmic community was vast and complex, full of species with capabilities and motivations beyond human understanding. Earth's place in it was still precarious, dependent on the continued effectiveness of the consciousness network she'd helped create. But as she looked out at the stars from her command station, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Humanity had proven they could face extinction and emerge stronger. They'd learned to integrate their darkness with their light, to maintain their individuality while achieving collective action. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they always had, together. The woman they'd once called Nightshade had become something greater than she'd ever imagined. But at her core, she remained what she'd always been, a pilot who would fly into the darkness to protect others, no matter the cost. The final test came 5 years after first contact, when the cosmic entity returned with news that would change everything. The trial humanity had passed was only the beginning, a qualification for something far greater and more dangerous. The convergence approaches, it announced to the assembled consciousness network. Every 50,000 years, the galaxy faces a choice. Species that have passed the trial must work together to prevent a catastrophe that would end all life in this sector of space. The time has come for humanity to take its place in this ancient duty. The scale of the threat was beyond anything they'd faced before. A force from outside the galaxy was approaching, something that existed beyond the normal dimensions of space and time. The only defense was a coordinated effort by every species that had ever passed the cosmic trial, a consciousness network that would span the entire galaxy. We need to link our network with theirs, Kira realized. Not just the architects or the other species we've met, but everyone. Every consciousness, every artificial intelligence, every form of awareness that exists in this galaxy. The preparation took months, as species that had been enemies for millennia worked together to create something unprecedented. The galaxy-spanning consciousness network was unlike anything that had ever existed, a collective intelligence that included organic minds, artificial intelligences, and forms of awareness that existed beyond normal classification. Kira found herself at the center of it all, her experience with consciousness integration making her one of the primary architects of the galactic network. The woman who had once been mocked as unfit for elite squadrons was now helping to design the most complex intelligence system in galactic history. When the extragalactic threat finally arrived, it came as a wave of destruction that consumed entire star systems. But the Galactic Consciousness Network was ready. Billions of minds working in perfect coordination, their collective will focused on a single purpose: survival. The battle existed on levels that transcended physical reality. It was fought in dimensions of pure thought, where the weapons were ideas and the battlefield was consciousness itself. The extragalactic force was vast and ancient, but it had never faced opposition like this. A galaxy united in purpose, their individual strengths woven into something greater than the sum of their parts. "Hold the line," Kira commanded, her voice carrying across the galactic network. "Remember what we're fighting for, not just our species, but the right of consciousness to exist in this universe." The victory, when it came, was complete and total. The extragalactic threat was turned back, its destructive wave dissipated by the combined will of an entire galaxy. But the cost was enormous. Entire species had sacrificed themselves to maintain the network, their consciousness absorbed into the collective to provide the power needed for victory. In the aftermath, as the galaxy began to rebuild, Kira found herself changed once again. The experience of leading a galactic consciousness network had expanded her awareness to levels that made her previous enhancements seem primitive. She could perceive the flow of time itself, feel the pulse of stars being born and dying, touch the vast intelligence that governed the cosmos. But despite her transformation, she remained fundamentally human. The woman who had once been called Nightshade carried within her the memories of every pilot who had served under her command, the lessons learned from every battle fought, the wisdom gained from every sacrifice made. "What happens now?" asked Lieutenant Chen, her own consciousness expanded by the galactic network but still recognizably human. "Now we go home," Kira replied. "We've proven that humanity deserves a place among the stars. We've earned our right to exist in this galaxy, but we're still human and Earth is still our home." The return to Earth was bittersweet. The planet that had given birth to their species seemed so small after experiencing the vastness of galactic consciousness. But it was also beautiful in its simplicity, its blue oceans and white clouds a reminder of everything they'd fought to protect. The woman who had once been written off as a failure stood on the observation deck of the orbital station that now served as Earth's primary defense, watching the sun set over the Pacific. Below her, the planet spun peacefully in the void, its surface unmarked by the cosmic battles that had raged around it. "Was it worth it?" asked a voice behind her. She turned to see Colonel Webb, now an old man but still sharp, still dedicated to the mission they'd shared for so many years. "Every moment," she replied. "Every sacrifice, every loss, every victory. It was all worth it to ensure that humanity would have a future among the stars." The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the Consciousness Network. New contacts on the edge of the solar system, but these weren't threats. They were explorers, representatives of species that had heard about humanity's role in the convergence and wanted to learn from their experience. "Looks like we're about to have more visitors," Webb observed. Kira smiled, feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and humanity had earned the right to explore them all. The woman who had once been called Nightshade was ready for whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that her species would face the future together, as they always had. "Send them our coordinates," she ordered. "Let's see what they have to teach us." As the stars wheeled overhead, Admiral Kira Volkov, the woman who had transformed from a failed pilot into the architect of humanity's cosmic future, prepared for the next chapter in her species' greatest adventure. The night was ending, and the dawn of a new age was about to begin.